Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum. I am your host Faisal Raza and you are watching Foresight. Viewers, finally government formation is completed. Prime Minister Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif chaired his first ever cabinet meeting with the focus on economic recovery. He termed it as do or die or now or never situation. Prime Minister acknowledged that 90% of the Pakistan's resources are under elite capture. They got subsidies and unfortunately this is the most injustice to the country. Government also hinted that they are going to engage International Monetary Fund not only for the ongoing standby arrangement of $3 billion to which a review mission is expected very soon, but also to engage the important lender regarding the extended fund facility of $6 to $8 billion and also some sort of climate financing as well. But what is more important that how the government will tackle this important economic crisis and what are the measures government is going to take, where are the areas which are very much important to focus on. This is the important segment at which we are focusing today. And for that matter, we have in our studios senior economist Dr. Usman Chohan with us. Most welcome to you, Dr. Usman.
Thank you.
We have other guests as well, and they will join us later in the program. My first question to you, Dr. Usman, that when we are talking about Pakistan's economic well-being and economic stability, it is important that a standby arrangement which is already going on, how successfully we are going to accomplish it, and what are the hopes for the successful extended fund facility in future to Pakistan.
Thank you for the question. I think it is very important to consider not just how we performed in the standby agreement now, but whether we can secure a subsequent extended fund facility. The answer, I believe, is that the extended fund facility will not be a problem. And the reason is that the performance overall by the caretaker government previously in adhering to the stipulations of the standby agreement was generally very good. It is always difficult to cover all of the bases in a large contract or agreement with that has so many dimensions.
Definitely.
But despite that, because the general crux of the efforts were to adhere to that, overall the IMF should be very satisfied, the caretaker government should be very satisfied with the performance they had in that short tenure, and now the new government should continue, and it has signaled that it will continue along the same lines as the caretaker government did. So the job has been made easier for this new government because of a slightly better footing to begin on.
Yeah, definitely it is. Pakistan's debt to GDP ratio stood at approximately 75%, and that was actually attained in the last year. And now the external debt reaching $125.7 billion when we are talking about particularly this month, March 2024. So do you not think that it is really alarming for Pakistan? And when we are talking about the solution, what could be ultimately?
Yes, I believe that Pakistan should not in the long run be a debtor country to international lenders as well as to friendly countries. It should actually be a creditor, extending credit and helping other countries. Now, two things really matter in debt. One is the principal and one is the interest. The principal has grown with time, but the real problem is with the interest payments. And that is because global interest rates have been generally very high since 2022. They have been high because the US set a high rate, then everybody else had to match some proportion of that. And wherever there was a more serious acute difficulty in the economy, they did it even higher. So in Pakistan, the discount rate went above 20%. It still is at that level. And this is very bad for growth. It's very bad for investment and business because you're much safer parking your capital.
Obviously.
So with that parking capital mentality, then interest payments balloon for any debtor, whether it's a sovereign debtor or a commercial debtor. And so Pakistan's interest has been the big problem. And I think as global interest rates begin to come down again to more normal levels, this should ease for us a little bit. And I believe that because my personal view is that the global economy should be slowing down a little bit over the next 12 months.
IMF is also hinting about that as well. So your point well taken. We have with us viewers, engineer Tahir Basharat Chima online, and he is the ex-MD Pepco and WAPDA as well, and he is the energy expert. Most welcome to you, Tahir Basharat Chima sahab.
Thank you very much.
My first question is related to the circular debt, which is really a talk of the town from the last many years. Pakistan has a cumulative energy sector circular debt is well over 5.7 trillion rupees. So, do we have any solution to this chronic problem?
Thank you very much. Circular debt indeed is a burden, is a yoke around our necks. It has to be mitigated. There's no doubt about it. But we'll have to explain and get into the nitty-gritties as to how this circular debt gets accumulated. The first thing is that maybe the true cost of energy is not being passed on to the Pakistani customer. But if you ask the customer, the Pakistanis are of the opinion that the rates, the energy rates, both for power, electricity I mean, and for gas are prohibitive to say the least. By the way, the rates are contributing the maximum to the current inflation. So in a way, this may not be true that we are not recovering the full cost of energy. The second thing is there are huge swaths of the country, primarily in southern Punjab, in northern and western Sindh, in the whole of Balochistan, in most of KPK, including the recently merged FATA, where people do not pay their bills. One, and secondly, they also indulge in illegal abstraction of energy. Now, why is it so that the distribution companies over there are not able to recover what is due to them in shape of the bills? Primarily, it is because of the per capita income of those areas. It does affect. Probably their paying capacity is much less than what the bills are. But the main thing is that the state's writ is missing in those areas, meaning thereby that the state has to be more serious. The state has to support the distribution companies in their recovery. Once that is done, the recovery would improve. Imagine we keep on talking about the circular debt, out of which like 2.6 trillion relates to power or electricity alone. The rest relates to gas. Whereas you'll be really surprised to know it, and it'll be a shock for the viewers also, that the receivables which are due to the distribution companies are upwards of 2.6 trillion, meaning thereby if that the recovery of receivables of the outstanding bills are is done, the circular debt simply vanishes. And out of that 2.6 trillion, again, it'll be a great surprise that 1.5 trillion relates to the private sector, industry, agriculture, residences, commercial connections, but 1 trillion relates to the government itself and the governmental entities. This also includes what the AJK has to pay. AJK says, Azad Jammu Kashmir says, that they have to be given an annual rate as per their agreement when Mangla was set up, whereas the federal government is not deciding that. In view, because of that alone, 300 million is billion is outstanding against AJK alone. And then for point, K Electric has to pay a lot of money, meaning thereby that the government itself has to move in, support the distribution companies, right? Ensure it's writ all over the country, and then assure whatever is built gets recovered. But at the same time, the bills have to be in accordance with the paying power of the people. That means a very strict audit has to be undertaken through which only the correct amounts get billed. We will also have to remember one thing, that because FPR is unable to collect, So the discos have been made the collecting agents for the FBR. So the bills also contain the general sales tax, the GST. It,
Tahir Cheema Sahab, how Pakistan move ahead, because Pakistan has the highest distribution and billing losses, which are 23%, means revenue available only on 77% energy supplied. So how do you see this area?
simple, very simple. You do what? You post professionals in the power ministry. One, at the moment, there are no professionals in the power ministry. No one, not even one. Then the BODs, which are staffed by incompetent and people who have no relevance to the power sector. So we need the professionals on the BODs. Then you'll be again surprised to know it. Out of the 10 distribution companies, only two have permanent CEOs, and the rest eight are on the look after charge. So we have to post the right person for the job and everything gets done. But the government has to support the distribution companies because the issue relates to the governmental writ also, which does not allow the discos to recover.
Okay, okay. Your point well taken. Thank you. So nice of you. Dr. Usman, when we are talking about Pakistan's uh, facilitation regarding the private sector and having some sort of protection of the consumer rights, then of course some of the rational policies and the right decisions. So this was duly mentioned and appropriately mentioned by the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in his first ever cabinet meeting, and he acknowledged that these things are required, and doing business is not the government's job. Basically, they have to facilitate the private sector, they have to carve the policies, they have to go on with that. So how do you see that statement, and do you not think that it gives us an idea that how much government is serious in tackling the economic issues?
You make a very good point. I fully agree with this remark that was made. I fully agree that the facilitative role is the ultimate role of a government, and it has to allow society to thrive through its private capital deployment. Now, this is rhetoric, and I've heard this rhetoric across governments. I hope that now we will actually see it being implemented, which means not just that the structure of government is made more lean, mean fighting machine, much more efficient in terms of resource deployment, but also that we start to take seriously the ease of doing business criteria that have been set out universally.
Obviously, yes.
And these ease of doing business things give you a rubric which you can say, you have this situation, that is what the ideal situation is, and can you bridge it? And if you bridge all of those criteria, in total there are 41, but there's about 15 that really matter.
Obviously.
If you can adhere to them, you are already putting the rhetoric that has been laid out into practice. So I believe that this statement now should be the starting ground for actual implementation, and I encourage that very much.
So what it means when the Prime Minister says that and acknowledge as well, after 75 years of the history of this country, that 90% of the resources, the country's resources, are under elite capture, and they got subsidies, which is the big injustice to the country, and hinted as well that he is going to do away all. So do you think that this is the right approach, and that must have to be implemented?
Yes, and basically he is drawing upon a large body of research that has now come to light. It has existed for about 20 years, but in recent times, publications have shown that the way our economy is designed, it favors a certain cadre of society in terms of the subsidies, in terms of the permits, in terms of the legal frameworks, in terms of the access to capital, in terms of the preferential treatment, that all compiles to tens of billions of dollars in annual subsidies, in a sense. And this distortion does not create the level playing field where you have 90% of your population not able to deploy the same capital. That means that the matching between talent in our society and capital in our society has not existed, which is the secret recipe for prosperity. So if you're doing away with these barriers are not always physical ones, they are also legal ones, they are also preferential ones, networks of people, bringing people to the table.
Some cartels, some mafias, and something like that.
Absolutely.
Yes, of course. So elite is actually enjoying the system, And unfortunately, the farmers, the students, the youth, the skilled workers, the laborers, all of them are suffering actually, even the working class, the salaried class. So how do you see that ever we have focused on that, and whether this is not the right approach, that government must have to focus those who are actually vulnerable but very beneficial for the system, for the country, for progress, for success. And along with that, government must have to do something about 12.5% of the unemployment that most of the youth is facing right now.
I fully agree with you. There was a time in Pakistan, if you read the accounts of people from the 1960s, where they would come to Karachi from all over the country and they would start new businesses and do wonderful things.
Yes.
That was the initial culture, and access to capital was much easier back then, and policies were laid out through 5-year plans with targets.
Obviously.
That you could do that. So the personal accounts of people who made businesses at the time are very positive, but then they became lazy with that. Lazy in the sense that there was a noted point that 22 families ended up monopolizing it.
Yes.
So it started good, then the monopoly happens. This is normal in capitalism. If you're playing the capitalist game, you must always keep in mind that the end game is inequality and that some people will do it. So you erode that again to start again and create a new economic cycle. In the old days that you read about in the Quran or the Bible, there was this thing called the Jubilee. And the Jubilee mean that all debts after a certain period, 50 years, 100 years, were erased so that people could start again.
Definitely.
So this kind of starting again has to happen. We are 50 years late because since the 1970s we haven't had that kind of openness for access. Now is the time to have that new openness because our public, I believe, is ready. Overseas Pakistanis are ready. Local ones are ready. And the world is now jump starting after the trauma of COVID. So the moment is coming now. And so what the government is saying, if it does it, is the perfect time to start again.
Means that Pakistan's future is very bright and we are heading towards it, and there are lots of hopes alive for that, really. That's good, really. Tahir Chima sahab, when we are talking about, as the Prime Minister also elaborated it in first cabinet meeting, and during that he said that what's the fault of the poor masses if the power distribution companies faced rupees 400 to 500 billion line losses due to the power theft. So what's your take on it?
Let me clear a few things. Actually, the main culprit may not be the distribution company itself. The main issue is wrongly accepted or negotiated power purchase agreements of the IPPs. Number two, wrongly installed located powerhouses which lead to losses. An NTDC, National Transmission and Dispatch Company, which cannot take care of the transmission and distribution needs of this country. Then, not the right kind of management for distribution companies. We'll have to remember one thing, that the distribution companies are required to recover everything, right from the wrongful or the badly negotiated IPPs, PPAs, whatever the losses are on the way, they have to recover everything. And then they have a BOD which is full of non-political, it is full of political people, non-professionals. And then there is no tenure for the chief executive officers. You'll be again surprised to know it that at the moment in the 10 discos in Pakistan, there are 60,000 vacancies. I mean, the staff is not there. So there are many things. But the basic thing is that because of the failing writ in many areas, the federal government, the provincial governments have to support the working of discos, and the things will improve. The Prime Minister is very, very right when it says that anything between 500 to 600 billion rupees is wasted through illegal abstraction of energy. That is there. So all in all, the government, the federal government, the provincial government, and the discos itself, they have to move in tandem, move together and assure that everything gets collected, one, and secondly, no one steals energy. It has to be a joint effort. The discos on their own cannot do it. You have understood that there are no professionals in the ministry concerned.
Definitely, you are absolutely very right. But IMF is saying to withdraw all subsidies from the electricity and gas. So, do you think that it means particularly that it's going to be unaffordable for many of the people of
even
Pakistan? So, resultantly, there would be more losses than revenue. Again, more losses than revenue.
actually what happens is we'll have to understand what subsidies are there. The worst kind of subsidies are the cross tariff subsidies, which the industry, the commerce, and high-end residential customers pay in order to subsidize people who use less or they do not have the income to pay their bills. So we have the first kind of subsidy is the cross tariff subsidy. If it goes, then the tariff becomes affordable, but it will become unaffordable for the people who are being given the subsidies. Secondly, in order to maintain a uniform tariff in the country, there are cross disco subsidies, like the disco at Islamabad, the disco at Lahore, the disco at Multan. Actually, they are subsidizing the discos in the KPK, the Balochistan, and the Sindh. So these are the issues. And the third kind of subsidy is the one which is doled out by the federal government for the low-end customers. So all in all, it is something very complex, but at the same time, it does not allow the sector to work on the one end. On the other end, if these are withdrawn, then the people, low-end customer, will not be able to live even or retain an electricity customer. So what happens is we have to actually make the whole system very efficient, and that can only be done through professionalism. Whatever we have at the moment, the management positions are badly manned. We need to correct that.
Your point well taken. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Usman, when we are talking about overall structure of Pakistan's economy, we are a consumer country. Primarily, we are the consumer country. And unfortunately, according to the international statistics, we are 92% we are consuming only. And the imports are, because that imports are coming, we are using it and then vanished. So why not reforms? Why not creating business opportunities? Why not to seek investments, facilitate all those investors who are coming to Pakistan, even the local investors, help them. And also a business encouraging environment, the growth oriented approach, and also the production, trade and export led growth. So why not this one? Why not we are opting it? Whether now the government is very enthusiastic, they are willing, they are thinking a lot on this important area. So what do you think about that, how we have to move on?
You have perfectly delineated the problem in terms of our GDP. GDP has 5 parts when you look at it at an output level. Consumption is the biggest one usually, but ours is too big, 92% as you said. The most interesting one is always investment, the next part. An investment to GDP ratio should be, for a growing country, an emerging market like ours, it should be 20%. So Bangladesh's is close to that, India's is around that, China's is much higher than that. It is 40%. So now they're investing a lot. In fact, they have the opposite problem, which we cannot even conceive of. But ours is now too low. It is hovering around 10%-ish on a lucky day, and actually much lower. Then the net of our exports and imports, and we import more than we export, that is the next problem. And then government spending is the last one. So in this mix, consumption is too large, like you said. And that is import fueled, and that is where you see the growth in the high GDP years you have over 25 years. But that is a bubble, or it's illusory, because once you have consumed that thing, it will depreciate and then it's no longer there. Government spending is always a mixture of revenue versus expenditure, and the expenditure side is too large, right, as opposed to investment. And our exports are not high enough. So what you are speaking to is this 5-part model, and the wrong parts are too large, and the 2 parts that should count, exports and investment, are not there. So I agree with you that we have to rebalance the composition of our GDP in terms of these variables.
Yeah, definitely. When we are talking about the subsidies, ending subsidies, IMF is also asking Pakistan to do that. So what it means, because uh, we have already perceived that whatever IMF say or ask, we have to move on for that. Because if you are ending all sorts of subsidies, even for the vulnerable, so it means that you are not going to get revenue, but only the burden. So how do you see this aspect?
Yes, this is a good point, that subsidies overall are a distorting factor, but sometimes there is a moral case or there is another ethical case to have subsidies to protect the most vulnerable. For example, a widow whose husband died for some reason, has 5 kids, that's a special case. But overall, if you have subsidies that are going to the already privileged, then you are doing something extremely inefficient with your economy. So the IMF says you have to cut that kind of subsidy, but it isn't necessarily saying that you have to shrink your social protections. It has an ambiguous means that it says some things in favor and sometimes it says some things against, depending on the global context, not just for Pakistan. And overall, it is a complex picture with the poor, and they do need support, but at the same time, that does drain the amount, but there may be a good reason to do that, a moral reason to do that. But for the elite, there is no moral case you can argue, and therefore that should be straight out the door.
Shehryar sahab, your point well taken. Tahir Chima sahab, when we are talking about electricity generation, it is said from the government side that we have some sort of excessive electricity available, but some of the power plants under the government being run on diesel and producing electricity at the cost of 60 rupees per unit. So why on expensive fuel, expensive energy generation, do we have any sort of a cheaper energy source? And if we have the cheaper energy, why, if we have excessive energy, then why such power plants are being used?
Thank you very much. I'll explain that the power sector has entered into a quagmire. It's like quicksand. We want to come out of it, we are unable to do so. The issue relates to transmission lines. So there are certain areas in the country where the transmission line acts. So in high summers, it is not able to transmit power over to that specific place. Then there are issues of fuel. Most of the fuel which comes is imported. So one day or the other, we have a new thing to contend with. There are times when we do not have LNG, and there are times when we do not have the furnace oil with us. So these are the things which have to be mastered, so that when we have excess capacity, then we should not have load shedding. But we'll have to remember another issue also, because there are huge swaths where illegal abstraction of energy, non-payment of bills culture prevails. So what happens is supply to those areas are restricted, they are reduced, whereby the whole demand reduces and certain power plants which are available are given orders not to generate, and but they have to be paid. So we pay them raw capacity charges. That also adds on to the rate, to the billing rate. So all in all, the whole sector needs to be corrected, but the basic problem is its governance and management. The governance is with the Ministry of Energy. They have no professionals. The management is with the BODs, which lack professionalism. And as I said earlier on, there are 60,000 vacancies in the discos. Imagine how can they work without those? All in all, it needs to be corrected. The nepotism has to go. Non-professionalism has to go. We have to move in accordance with the requirements, which are truly professional. Once that is done, you'll see that the power plants will get the fuel on time and the bills would also get paid. But before that, nothing much can be done. Whatever is happening, we'll have to accept that. Similarly, we have to remember one thing, that the main hammer that fell on the power sector has been the extremely depleted value of the Pakistan rupee, when most of the fuel is imported.
Your point well taken. Dr. Usman, we were talking about ending subsidies, and there is another area which is very much focused of IMF. Even we have to think about it as well, but in a rational way. That is unnecessary government expenditures. And then the privatization of state-owned enterprises. And privatization is not the only solution. Either you have to change the management, or you have to just give them to some of the talented individuals or to the company to run it, to have end results and all that. So, and to bring the foreign investments. So how do you see these important areas for the government?
I think this is the most important area. It is the most important area because it is no longer sustainable. Therefore, the biggest burden on the economy is the one that creates the most unsustainable outcomes. So I believe that the expenditure part is much more important than the revenue part, because there's only so much that you and I can be further squeezed before we have nothing to give. Revenue is not the issue. It is you're raising revenue to do what? The expenditure side. And we have such a large provincial and federal level system and even local level system. And is it creating enough public value for the people? If you survey, they will say it isn't. Therefore, you must see, especially the provincial level, what is being done, that accountability. And on privatization of things, there is one deeper question. The deeper question is, can you have a leadership of an organization that does right by its mission? If that is a public system with technocrats coming and other important people making decisions for the sake of viability of that organization, then that is the right way to do it. If you cannot, because too much political intrusion comes, vote banks and other things, then you have to look at a private sector thing. But private sector doesn't automatically mean a noble sector.
Obviously.
Private sector may have its own politicization. It may do a fire sale. It might asset strip the organization. That is what we don't want. So it's more a question of the traits of leadership and whether they are beholden to some other agency, some other entity.
So why not that when we are talking about ending subsidies and curtail the government expenditures and all that, so there is something, as you are talking about the political leadership, it is now depending upon the political leadership to have political stability. Along with that, they have to steer the nation towards a point where they can just end up some of the important things, like we have to curtail our fuel consumption, why we are using lots of cosmetics in the country, why we are too much addicted to the tea and all other things. So these are all imported items.
Yes.
So why we are spending billions and billions of dollars and they have no outcome actually.
Yes.
So what about it? That nation has to sacrifice a little, and these political parties and the political leadership, they have to steer the nation.
I think it is a fantastic point, and it's really going to the crux of the moral existence of man on this planet, because you have cosmetics because you think you are ugly, but actually we are a beautiful people, fundamentally. But that appreciation of our own self-confidence as manifested isn't there. So we need cosmetics to redesign our appearance, which is not necessary. And if you did, you do it indigenously.
Yeah, definitely it is.
And the same thing is true for the fuel consumption. People are oftentimes driving around for no reason, because their homes are so boring. Why are their homes so boring? Because they haven't cultivated a vibrant inner life. That is an educational issue, actually. So they roam about making your life miserable on the roads, and I don't believe they should do that. That is the deeper level of it. Plus, the structure of how people get around. It would be nice to have inner city trams and trains across the cities in other ways that are more fuel efficient, as well as the conversation has suggested, solar power to use on-site generation. So we should have vibrant inner lives, vibrant outer appearances, and a vibrant society. That's the real goal that we're looking at today.
Yeah, definitely it is. And what about the when we are talking about IMF want to enhance the tax base, but why not we are initiating the direct taxes, take some of the bold steps, because it is important. Why discriminatory indirect taxes? Then especially on the common public and salaried class is actually suppressed because of they are targeted every time whenever there would be a tax evasion or a gap in your revenues. So why is it so? Why the double and triple taxation on salaried class as well?
Oh, you're absolutely right. And that's why I think that the bold steps need to be taken. The rot always starts in an organism at the top, like a snake has a rot starting in the head, or the fish. Similarly, the example is set by the leadership. So if they take sincere austerity, which is generally not the case for 75 years, then other people will see that, okay, this person who could have enjoyed more, he is sacrificing, therefore I should sacrifice. That is the value system. If people at the top do not take sacrifices, then people at the bottom will try to get as much as they can, which isn't much. And so they still live in the rut of a misery without actually realizing that together we can accomplish something bigger.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Dr. Usman Chohan, for being here in the studios, and thank you very much for your candid and very explanatory discussion. Really, thank you very much. So nice of you.
Thank you.
Viewers, we welcome here Mr. Shehryar Akram Awan. He is the Additional Commissioner for Federal Board of Revenue, and he is the taxation expert as well. Most welcome to you, Shehryar Awan, sir. Thank you very much for being here in the studios.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Honored indeed.
So, when we are talking about Pakistan's tax base, IMF is also demanding that tax base must have to be enhanced, tax the untaxed areas, and formalize the informal economy, and also that do some steps which are visible on that account. So, how do you see and what do you think about that, how this all going to be happen?
Sir, actually, the only barrier lies within ourselves. This is actually a cultural issue, a mindset issue. We have to change that. We have to have a tax pro culture. We have to develop that. We have to make that, and we have to engender that among masses. We have to adopt a mindset as a government as well as people that we have to collect tax as well as we have to pay tax. Unless and until we have that mindset set through education, formal as well as informal, we can't make progress.
So, do you think that the government, state and the state institutions along with the people, they have the friendly attitude with each other to have the real-time tax culture in the country?
Yeah. Actually, government is striving very hard. FBR is striving very hard to promote that culture. And we are making all-out efforts to meet our targets, indeed to exceed them. But obviously, there are economic situations, political situations, which must be, and social situations, and the mindset of the people, which must be also kept in mind. But despite that, FBR is faring very well, and the new government is very much dedicated and committed from the day one to get IMF loan and to fulfill its promises with IMF. And FBR is set on its target.
Actually, those are the promises not only with IMF as well, but those are some sort of restructuring reforms which are needed, direly needed to Pakistan's, if we want to be stabilized into the economy as well. So, when we are talking about taxing a common man, particularly, unfortunately we don't have much direct taxes, we have indirect taxes, and the salaried class is always targeted to have those taxes, like they are paying some at some junctures might be the double taxation or the triple taxation. First of all at source tax, then afterwards some of the slabs they are paying, then afterwards the utility bills and groceries in the form of indirect taxes. So, how do you see that aspect?
Actually, we should, it relates to your first question as well, we should increase our tax base horizontally. For that, we have to employ technology, which FBR is continuously trying to improve, and it's collecting data from different agencies, including NADRA, including motor vehicle registration authorities.
Yeah, definitely.
Including
lots of things were digitalized.
Authorities, including land revenue authorities.
Even the new finance minister is very jubilant, and he wants that the taxation must have to be digitalized at every juncture.
Exactly. Actually, ideally we should reach a stage, and inshallah, I hope we will reach a stage when every CNIC should be an NTN number, and its information, the data with NADRA should be connected with FBR. When FBR has access to the data of NADRA, bank accounts, the motor vehicles registered in a person's name, houses, land, property, its foreign visits, even it should be linked with FIA and passport offices data.
Obviously.
So when we have all that data, we can capitalize on that, and we have very much, we are working on that, and we have already a lot of data, which in coming days we shall see that government's drive will soon pick up its pace.
Yeah, definitely.
And
definitely.
as far as the salaried persons are concerned, your question is concerned, so everywhere in the world, salaried persons do pay tax. It's not double taxation or triple taxation. Actually, since our direct taxation system is not as much strong as it should be, ideally it should be, it's called progressive taxation. But our, due to certain constraints, so far we had to rely on withholding taxes, due to which we have to pay taxes which are deducted at source at different stages or through different techniques and at different forums. But most of those taxes are adjustable. So if a salaried person's tax is deducted on utility bill, or let's say if he gets a vehicle and he gets it registered, he can claim it in his return and get refund as well.
What about the salaried class, basically? Because you have explained it a lot, but what about salaried class?
So actually salaried class is taxed all over the world. It's not just in Pakistan. The only difference is that when the salaried class is taxed, including me and you, then most of the time our tax is deducted when our salary is paid, and we don't feel it a lot. Had we to pay it out of our own pocket after receiving the full salary, then it might have seemed more difficult to us. Now there is another thing to it which you asked earlier, that in many cases when we have paid tax on our salary, then we again pay tax on our utility bills or on our different transactions, let's say on at a petrol pump, or when we buy something, or
definitely,
we get registered our vehicle.
Because the indirect taxes are everywhere.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
have to.
Exactly. That's actually that our economy is still progressing, and ideally direct taxation system should be very strong, and that's a progressive system.
Definitely.
When we reach that point, I think then these withholding taxes system will automatically reduce. This is in place because we rely on it to meet our budget targets, because our economy is not much documented. But let me say it, that if a salaried class person's tax is deducted at when he uses some utility, gets registered his vehicle, or buys some property, then most of the time those taxes are adjustable, and he can claim them back in his return and get the refund of them.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It's not a big issue. It's not
Experts say that at least rupees 4 trillion was withdrawn from elite, and that burden is actually shifted to the public, the common public. How such a system can sustain? And what the Prime Minister said, exactly the same, because is the elite is more powerful, and they have more exploited the system. What is happening actually?
Well, actually every system has its own weaknesses and strengths, and since ours is a developing country and economy and society as well, our mindset is not as much pro taxation. So everybody whosoever can save himself tries to save himself through different avoidance or evasion techniques. Avoidance is acknowledged worldwide as a legal thing. So avoidance is something which you can legally do. You can pay a less tax, but that is legal. And evasion is something which is illegal.
Definitely.
So evasion is basically being targeted by our government, and we have to target that, and we have to reduce and minimize that, and to end that eventually. So as far as there is in fact there is some there is a sort of inequity or inequitable system in place due to different factors, maybe due to our economic conditions, maybe due to we are or constraint conditions, maybe we have extended exemptions to certain sectors, to very well off, big, huge taxpayers. I think we have already been mulling over this, that to withdraw those exemptions gradually at government level as well as at FBR level, And IMF also demands from us
Definitely,
this.
definitely.
And we
They
will have
also
to take
demand
that
and
step to.
when we are talking about particularly the measures to enhance the tax base, plug in the gaps, and when only 1/3 of the tax revenue is actually collected, and a leakage or the tax evasion is 75%. So how do you see that particularly?
Sir, we are undertaking massive measures to broaden tax base, and in coming days, inshallah, people will see that, because the government is committed and IMF also demanding that, FBR is on it, that we are going to broaden the tax base. We are going to bring, inshallah, retailers in TaxNet, and our government is also focusing to bring into TaxNet the very, very big sector, the planning and development, which undertakes which people who are into housing industry, who are into construction industry, who are earning huge profits, and most of the time they go undocumented and unaccounted for. So it should not be. We have to book them. We have to collect taxes from them properly. So I hope the things will gradually improve and change.
Thank you very much, Shehryar, Akram, Awan Sahib. Thank you very much for your presence here in the studios. I'm really thankful to you. Tahir, Basharat, Chima Sahib, thank you very much for being with us online. Thank you very much for your candid views. Viewers, as you have listened to our panelists, it is important that no doubt that there is a standby arrangement going on with IMF. Also, we are very much hopeful, the government is very much hopeful regarding the extended fund facility from IMF as well. That negotiation yet to be started. But on that note, it is important that we have to correct ourselves because the tax culture is necessary for Pakistan to grow. It is important that every citizen who is well off must have to pay taxes. Elite must have to be pay for that, for the development of the country. Along with that, we have to have some sort of drastic reforms needed to correct the economic woes, and particularly for the long-term economic stability, and particularly the energy sector, which is very important. We have to just go away with the circular debt issue, which is important for Pakistan to grow on and have a cheaper energy. We have to try our best to have cheaper energy. Alternate source, renewable sources of energy must have to be taken in account. Along with that, it is important that we have to, as a nation, we have to correct ourselves, we have to unite ourselves, we have to stand united so that sincerity and the sincerity of the purpose, that must have to be prevailed if we want to grow ahead, and if we strengthen our economy, because the only way that international community listen our voice in that sense, when we will be a strongest economy, the best economy. This is all from today's Foresight. It's time to sign off. Allah Hafiz.